Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Dank Christian Memes podcast or Reddit talk. We're not sure what we're calling it. We're calling it a few things right now. This is what we got going on. There is a detail in the comments. We're going to be talking with Olive of Olive Tiger. This is the way our show is going to go, just so you guys know from the start. We're going to be starting out interviewing our guest, who is Olive/Alice here for us. We're going to talk about her experience in music, with faith, and with life. And then we are going to move towards question and answer sessions and giving folks an opportunity to share a bit about their faith experience, whether or not, music plays into your spirituality or religious practice or not. So why don't we start with introductions? First of all, can you guys on stage hear me? Void Boy, how do I sound?
You sound perfect. You're loud and clear.
See, now I can never trust you. That's the way too kind of response. But thank you anyway.
I think you sound great too.
Okay, well now it feels a little more genuine. So I'm just going to start and give myself a little introduction, and then you guys can give introductions. My name is Broclen. I am the moderator and digital minister for Dank Christian Memes. For those who don't know, Dank Christian Memes is a place for all kinds of Christians and all kinds of non-Christians to enjoy memes and conversation, whether it's silly or more serious or evocative. So we have been doing podcasts here as a way to, do a little something more with our community and see if we can bring some folks in with more diverse experiences around faith and just life experience. So I'm going to start. Void Boy, you want to give yourself a quick intro, and then we'll move on to our guest of honor?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Some of you might know me. I'm Void Boy. I've been on these at least one chat before. I am mainly what I do. I just kind of like draw for a living, or at least I try to. I try to be very active member of this little community, mostly on the Reddit talk side, and it's been very fun. And I'm very open-minded person. In terms about faith specifically, I've kind of been floating around a bit, but I really enjoy engaging in spiritual practices and talking about people's different spiritual experiences, and it's something really fun, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, and thank you for being here. And we hope that at Dank Christian Memes that we're a spot where, folks can feel comfortable, whether they feel like they're solidly in a faith tradition or they're moving between faith traditions or maybe away from faith altogether, that those experiences are valid and we like hearing about them and talking about them. We're going to get into, a lot of discussions here, but Olive/Alice, first of all, what should I call you?
You can call me Olive. I'm sorry, it's a little confusing that my name here is Allison Lanes, but I have been a Reddit lurker for a very long time, and there's just enough time between each of my logins that I have ended up with many nicknames. So I had to go through several screen names to find one that I could remember the password for. So I was trying to find one that had Olive in it, but was unsuccessful. So here we are.
All right. As a starting aside, in your best guess, how many Reddit accounts would you say you have made over the years, whether or not you can still log into them?
I would guess approximately 8.
Wow. Now, you haven't been banned from anything, so it's not ban avoidance or anything like that. But
no, it's just 100% cannot remember passwords, and then whatever email I had set up with the previous one, I just can't figure it out. And yeah. I mean, normally I can get around that kind of basic internet thing, but I don't know why, but for some reason on Reddit I've had a hard time. So
Reddit is a strange place. It is a different place. So it's not surprising that you might think of it or remember it differently. One last note before we carry on here. I just want to let you guys know we're not going to be adding anyone else on stage unless there's someone I've already talked to. When we get to the Q&A and discussion session, then I'm going to be inviting folks on the stage. We generally run the chat in 2 modes. The first is chill mode, where after our interview, we'll kind of have a casual back and forth. But sometimes we get just a few too many people talking, or sometimes the subject gets gets a little serious. So when that happens, we shift into moderator mode. Everyone will mute their mics. We'll focus discussion on one question, and then we'll give everyone a chance to talk. So we'll see how that goes. So Olive, I feel like talking about faith alone is such a big thing, and talking about music is such a complicated thing. How does your story with the two of those things kind of start?
Yeah, well, I feel like music was always such a big part of my and my family's experience in church in general. I remember when I was really young, we kind of were bouncing around a couple different churches because I don't know, something happened with one church that I was too young to remember, and then we were on the search for a different church, and we ended up at this very tiny community church, which was mostly just singing. And then after that, church ended up closing down because we were too small and we just weren't growing and we couldn't financially sustain ourselves.
These things happen.
Yes, we ended up at when I was in maybe 6th or 7th grade at an evangelical church, which was much larger, had like a full band, and music was a much more developed part of the worship service in that church. And in the meantime, previously, when we were going to the very small church, the youth group consisted of basically me, my brother, and the pastor's son. And so I was visiting.
That's small.
Yes. So I was visiting my friend's youth group. One of my good friends in middle school, she went to a Pentecostal church. And so I was visiting their youth group for quite some time. And so when we were shopping for new churches, I was trying to sort of rope my family into going there, and because I was connected with a lot of people at that church. And
so you were a little drawn to Pentecostalism.
Well, yeah. I mean, there was just at the time, I think I was really drawn to the aliveness of that tradition and just how spirited those services are. And I did convince my family to visit the Pentecostal church for one service. And like 10 minutes into the service, there was like grandmas doing backflips down the aisles. And my parents were like, this is too much, for them.
For those who might not know, Pentecostalism is a denomination of Christianity that is known for its enthusiastic embrace of the Holy Spirit. And this can take the form of all sorts of songs or just sort of physical representations of faith, and some speaking in tongues and some other things you don't see in a lot of other denominations. So Pentecostalism is a really interesting to space, even if it's not for everyone, as it seems your parents learned.
Yeah, it was they're a little, I mean, they're mild in some ways and not in other ways, but it was just I think maybe too loud for them, maybe, which is also kind of funny because we ended up at another church that had drums for the music. But yeah, it was I think there was something about it that didn't quite like resonate with them, and so I was not able to convince them to stay there. But and then there was this awkward period when I was trying to integrate into the new church, and I was trying to go to both youth groups, and I felt like I was abandoning and betraying the Pentecostal youth group. And
yeah, some churches are really big on loyalty, and they expect you to renounce your membership in one church before you take part in another one. So that could be a little bit of a spicy space to be.
Oh, for sure. It was really interesting. I did find over time, though, that I did end up kind of leaning towards the new youth group. Just, I don't know, I can't remember quite why. I think just for like time's sake, because, at the time when you're going to church 3 times a week, how many youth groups can you really sustain? So, but yeah, I was
all the youth groups.
Yes, exactly. So I was extremely devout. I didn't even start questioning until I got to college. So when I arrived, I actually chose a state school over going to a Christian college, like specifically because there were going to be more people to convert at the at the state school.
I had never considered that and I think that's kind of bold. I've heard and seen in comments on the sub that a lot of people will say, don't go to those public schools, don't go to those state schools. You got to go to like a bona fide Christian, to whatever denomination you come from usually. But you actually is like, no, I'm going to take on this state school and I'm going to make believers of everyone. That's
I truly
next level.
That's
awesome.
What was going to happen. I mean, I just want everybody to understand that, like, it was such a, after I arrived there and started going through my process of deconstruction, it was very world shaking for me. And Broclen, I've known you through that time, and you were actually like one of the first people I met that really started to broaden my perspectives about what a Christian.
And you can dish on me if you want to dish on me. That's fine. That's fair. I signed up for this. So.
Well, I want everybody to know that when I met Broclen at our college, I literally did not believe that he was a Christian because he swore. I was like, Christians don't swear. I don't know what planet this guy's from, but he's a Christian.
Yes, they fucking do. Now, since my daughter's been born and I do work at a school, I have tried to do much better with my swearing. But when I'm around my closest friends, that's me when I'm relaxed. For sure.
So I went to school as a music major, and I heard about music therapy after my senior year of high school. So the year after I graduated high school and before I started going to college was really a very integral moment in my life, because that was when I learned about music therapy. I was already registered to go for music education, but like, honestly, being in front of a classroom full of screaming children every day was not exactly what once I kind of clicked that, like, that's the actual job. Like, yes, you are teaching music, but really it's classroom management. I was like,
and the college that we attended was pretty keen to usher people into the education track. Because it was one of the biggest things that the university in question sold. As we get closer to the subject, we'll go into music therapy and what that actually is. But yeah, I definitely can imagine at our college there being a gravitational pull towards education, which I think I was like, oh, maybe I'll teach history. I'm like, wait a minute, I don't want to teach at all.
Yeah. For sure. So I ended up, once I learned about music therapy, I was like, that is a perfect thing. That's exactly what I want to do. But the college didn't have a major for that. So I ended up deciding to just kind of steam ahead and do an undergrad with a general music degree in psychology and French concentrations, and then go and do what they call an equivalency degree in music therapy, where if you have some sort of related undergraduate degree in music therapy, you can study music therapy on a graduate level while filling in whatever holes you've come to the graduate school with. So since I had music, like general music knowledge and psychology knowledge, I was filling in a lot of like how to run groups, like that kind of thing for my equivalency work. So anyway, but it was there was a really that summer that I mentioned between senior year and freshman, my older brother had gone off to college the year ahead of me, and like really just crashed and burned, because like we were all kind of coming out of this like somewhat sheltered environment, which I think overall I'm very grateful for. Like, I'm very grateful that I had a really stable upbringing. I think that is a really beneficial part of having been involved in the church as a younger person growing up. But of course it was quite a jump into cold water, like once I went to school. But my older brother, so I didn't even start questioning until I got to college. I just totally swallowed like all of the responses that they programmed me with in the apologetics classes. I was like, yep, okay, this is what I say to that thing. This is what I say to that thing, like without really applying.
Sort of the catechism back and forth that you imagined would be happening.
Yeah. I didn't really apply any critical thinking to any of the things that they told me to say. And for those who aren't familiar with the term apologetics, I'm not sure how common that is in other denominations, but it's basically like a class where they say, here's what people are going to challenge about your faith, and here's your answers for those things.
Right. I think a lot of denominations are primarily concerned with the apologetics around atheism and whether or not there's the existence of God, which is why that is one of the subjects online that has been done to death.
Right.
Folks who have your hands up, we're going to get to a Q&A later, but it's going to be a little bit. But thank you for being with us. There was something I wanted to. I have to check comments. I'm sorry. Nope, no valuable comments. Okay.
Okay. All right. Well,
What do you mean? There's no such thing as
the last thing I
invaluable
wanted to mention was okay. We'll come back to the not good comment. Deconstruction. I feel like this is something we've mentioned a couple times already, and we're going to mention more probably in this episode and others. Deconstruction is really really buzzing right now in evangelical circles, but it can apply to any denomination or religious experience. It's basically when you experience something or start doubting, and you start to pick apart the pieces of your faith and how it fits together. In some cases, this is how people end up moving away from faith. And for others, this is like they deconstruct and then they reconstruct, and their faith gets sort of amended and becomes more flexible instead of going away altogether. So I just want to push against this preconceived notion that well, if you're deconstructing your faith, then you're on the road to atheism. I don't believe that. I don't think that's fair. So yes, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about what deconstruction actually is. Should we look at the comments, Void Boy? Are you holding me to my mod honesty here?
Oh no, not necessarily. I mean, if you see something that is immediately relevant, bring it to the table. And I do enjoy this talk about deconstruction, because it, at least when I hear it for the first time in this subtext, it typically means deconstructing your faith does sound like you're taking it apart and really looking at it for what it is, almost like in a mechanical sense, right? You're reverse engineering it, right?
It's like Legos.
Like Legos.
Yeah. Are you gonna you can break a piece off and build another piece on? Will what you make be completely different or not? Or do you just like it in pieces and you don't want to build anything?
Yeah. And I think, like you said, that there is a general fear of like, oh no, this is like the surefire way of like, losing your faith. I mean, it's not necessarily, right? Because I mean, we can't we can't know that for sure.
I think that when deconstruction comes from a place of hurt and maybe anger, and that's fully justified, I think that it may be more likely. I think deconstruction isn't a single thing. I know that it's been important for me, and I'll talk about that later. I think actually that deconstruction, at least to a degree, is something that a lot of clergy are very comfortable doing, but we don't talk about it because we don't want to scare our parishioners. I think that's real.
Yeah, and I think that defensiveness is something that is very natural, and especially, I mean, when you have. I mean, at least I can only speak for myself and my experience, but I mean, for me, I know that the faith that I had going into that experience was very kind of circular and buttoned up. Things made sense.
Well, that was going to be my question. That deconstruction itself seems problematic in that setting, because you sort of, the impression I got, and correct me if it's the wrong impression, was that it wasn't all about critical thinking. It was about sort of loyalty to a creed or an apologetic line or whatever the situation called for.
Yeah, exactly. It was and yes. Yes. And I think that going into that experience, so I had a really important conversation with my brother. I mentioned earlier that he had gone off to college and kind of failed with flying colors, bursting out of the bubble and just sort of like diving into all that stuff. He started questioning before I did. So his last couple years of high school, he was just kind of like biding his time and like doing the things he needed to do to not get into trouble. But once he got to college, he was like off and running. Whereas like I got to college and I'm like, I'm here to convert everybody, like
yeah.
Very different approaches. So I'm
going to make a meme of that. Convert all the things. Just
yeah, I mean, and that's such a focus of the evangelical faith, right? Like there was so many stories floating around about like when you die, like I remember there's this one in particular where like you die and like Peter brings you into this library filled with like, I mean, I don't know how many people here are old enough to like remember card catalogs at a library where like there's just giant drawers with giant like stacks of index cards in them. And, just a huge room with like floor to ceiling catalogs of like every interaction you've ever had in your entire life. And he pulls this one drawer and he's like, these are all the people that you witnessed to. And it's tiny and it's pitiful and it's like awful. And you're like, oh my God, I'm responsible for all these other people I talked to going to hell. And there's really such an emphasis placed on like, that like you can be that one person between that person and eternal damnation. And there's so much pressure around that I understand.
I feel like if we weren't so narrow on dogma, that would be a good reflex. These are all the people you could have helped. How many of them did you help? But when it's only about proselytizing, it's easy to feel like, ooh, that's just yucky no matter what.
Yeah. So I decided that I was going to be the person to gently bring my brother back into faith and to challenge him. And so he picked me up.
You're a very goals-oriented person. That's what I'm thinking of here.
Yeah. So he picked me up from a cello lesson one time in that summer between my senior year and freshman year. And I was like, this is the moment. And I was really leaning heavily on that verse that said, I think like Peter or somebody is going to speak to like some wanton group of people that have gone off the rails. And God says like, don't worry about what you're going to say. I'll give you the words to say when the time is there or whatever. So I was like, all right, I'm not going to plan what I'm going to say at all. I'm just going to dive right in there.
That's living by faith. Like, it sounds like you're taking these conclusions to their logical direction. And really putting them to the test of the process. I really like it.
Yeah. So I was like, hey, like, I remember he had on his dashboard this like bobblehead Jesus for some reason.
Oh my God.
I don't know.
They're very common.
Yeah.
They're all over the place.
Doesn't everyone get one after, like honorary bobblehead Jesus?
UDMV should give it to you with your license plate.
Yeah. And so I awkwardly started the conversation, I think somehow based off of the bobblehead Jesus. I don't remember what I said. And honestly, I don't remember a whole lot of the conversation either, except that he was so gentle and so kind and so loving with just sort of gently bringing up all of these points that I hadn't thought about, and all of these points that the church just, sort of conveniently glossed over that. And I didn't really have answers for anything except for, I do remember one thing, like the one part of the conversation that did stick in my brain was him saying, like, don't you think it's weird that like the only time that you really feel God is when you're at these like huge youth rallies? Because we used to go to these huge, almost every summer, these huge youth rallies with like 2,000, 5,000 kids with this big band, and there was a lights and the music, and like everybody's just like in this space, and it feels like so powerful.
And I was going to the wrong Christian camps because we were in a cabin in the woods. So
we did that too.
I don't know where. I don't know what denomination I have to be on board with, but I feel like I could have had more pizzazz in my church camp experience.
Yeah. I don't know if that is because we also had church camp that was like more like camping, but these were like big youth rallies that we would drive like out to Michigan or somewhere. Like the church would rent a bus and just pile everybody in, and like off we'd go. So to me, I was like, well, no, I feel God in my room. I feel God like everywhere. But to him, like that was the only time that he could really connect to that feeling of being like emotionally connected to spirit. So, and that was like the only retort that I had for any of the other things. So the crucial thing was that like at that moment, I decided that I was still convinced that like there's answers for these questions. I'm going to still come out Christian on the other side. I'm going to, I'm sure that there are answers to all of these questions, but I felt like it was really important in that moment to be honest with myself about if there was a particular thing where the only backing for that thing was because the Bible says so, that for me, that was no longer going to be good enough. I felt like things should be verifiable outside of this one book. Like, it's a big world, and there's a lot of, I mean, yes,
I think that's a point of contention for a lot of people, especially when they first start to do some deconstruction, is that, especially if you took history. In my history class, it's like you need multiple primary source arguments, that are drawn from actual, context. You can't just draw on a single thing, a single book, a single tradition. And, I think a lot of people look at that with the Bible and they say, ouch.
Yeah, totally. And I get that the Bible is a book that has so much value and so much to learn from it. Where some people are like, this is the book, this is the only book I need. And I can see how people can reach that conclusion. And I felt like for me, starting to read other books, it was like, oh, other books have valuable things in them too. But yeah, so I think that was a really crucial decision. Just again, deciding to be honest with myself and to feel like my faith should be able to defend itself, and that I shouldn't have to ignore other aspects of knowledge and truth in order to protect this one particular denomination with this one particular set of beliefs. Where I remember driving to church on Sunday mornings on like Easter and Christmas, and driving past the church down the block that would have the parking lot like completely packed on those 2 days. And my dad be like, oh, like all those EC Christians over there, like who only go to church on Easter and Christmas. And like, just like the general idea that like so many other kinds of even Christian faith, like wasn't good enough for whatever reason, that like, I remember kind of, having this view that like, oh, Baptists, like they're cool. Like they, basically people, if the church,
that there was a line and denominations were either on one side of that line or the other.
And there was like 3 other denominations that were like in the okay zone, and everything else was like, I don't know, some sort of, I don't even know what, because I think when you're young too, like you kind of absorb these ideas from your parents without really
definitely
like critically thinking.
I think that's why on a lot of unchurched, a lot of people who grew up in the church, what I would call churched people, struggle to reach out to the unchurched, because there is a difference in perspective, not necessarily in belief all the time, but growing up in the church and not growing up in the church can make a significant difference. And I think that sometimes the people in those two categories aren't speaking the same language.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about how do we get tying all this to music, right? I really enjoy that perspective of getting things outside of like, one particular text, right? Mm-hmm, and I had a MFA professor, she's a writer, and she talked about that sometimes when you're creating something, there's a chronology, right? In history, we have chronologies, but there's also an emotional chronology where there's moments where you have faith and then you don't have faith. Right. And that there's like no like dates, right? There's like a moment you have it and there's the moment you don't. And that's the emotion and the feeling, right? How do you take those emotions that you got from readings and, your deconstruction and combine that and like weave that into your music?
Yeah, I love that question. Thanks. So I think, for me, I had to go through a whole process of, once I made that decision, to be honest about what, each belief, like I had to look at each belief one by one. So I had to look at like the idea of the Trinity. What do I believe about that? Like, do I believe that Jesus was a historical person? Like, okay, yes, there's evidence for that. Okay, how about this other thing and that other thing? Like all the way down to like, do I believe in God? And so, I mean, there was definitely a point where I was like, I mean, I don't know. To me, I feel like belief in God is one of those things, like many things in life, where depending on what you want to believe, you will find evidence for that. If you want to believe in God, you will see evidence for God everywhere. If you don't want to believe in God, you will see evidence of the lack of God everywhere. And
Well,
similarly to love too, right? Like if you believe in love, you believe that that is out there, and you will find it. If you don't believe it's there, it's going to be a lot harder to find it. You may still come across it. You know,
I
God may
think
still
faith
smack
is
you in the face
also
someday, but
faith is also a lot more dynamic than people make it out to be. And I think, I think I said this in our last podcast too, that faith untested by doubt is no faith at all. And the biblical stories we have are evidence of that, where we see like the 12 disciples, for example, walked with Jesus and still doubted and still fled and still denied him. We should not assume that our faith would be any better of that. I think a lot of people feel like their faith needs to always be at high tide. And I don't think that's realistic. And I think it can add a level of shame to problems that doesn't need to necessarily be there in a lot of cases.
right. I think I forget who said something along the lines of like an unexamined faith. I forget what the quote is, but something about like unexamined faith.
An unexamined life is not worth living. Maybe Socrates, but it might be one of those made up Socrates quotes.
Yeah, one of those guys.
One of those dudes.
The Greeks.
Yeah.
I love them.
All the Greeks said that.
You know the ones we're talking about.
But yeah, so moving like from that point where I was like, okay, all of the Legos are on the floor. Which pieces of the Lego do I want to build back? In that process, I ended up going to grad school for music therapy in Tallahassee, and those years were really hard. Like I really had the feeling like the whole rug was pulled out from under me. Like like I was talking about before, I had this whole kind of very circular faith that was felt very comforting, very buttoned up. There was an explanation for everything. Everything made sense. Also conveniently like putting me above other people. So convenient. And really like moving forward, I was like, I don't want that. Like, I don't want moving out of that. Like in that time when all the Legos were on the floor, I was able to look back at the way that I related to the world when I was in that buttoned up space and realize that like every single new person that I met, there would be like, I would be trying to suss out like, A, if they were a Christian or not, B, were they like the quote, right kind of Christian? And then depending on the answer to that, like would determine like, how close am I going to be to this person? What kind of, what kind of possibilities is there for this new relationship?
I like to think I jump roped with that line between being the right kind of Christian, that I'd do a bunch of things wrong, and then I'd go preach for a Sunday and confuse you.
Well, the fact that you were like going to seminary school was just baffling to me and very interesting. And yeah, that was, yes.
But it's hard when you're like, when every time you see someone, you're like holding up this little litmus test, trying to figure out what you're dealing with.
Right. Instead of just being able to meet a person as a person and recognize that like every single person has such a complicated history of their interactions with other people, like what their family of origin situation was like, even all the different situations that they've been in throughout their life. And that, like, who am I to judge what conclusions anybody comes to based off of those experiences? Like I think I read some statistics somewhere that they used to like hang over our heads in apologetics where like if somebody doesn't convert to Christianity by the age of 18, I think it's like, upwards of 80 or 90% of Christians are Christian by the age of 18. So it's like, okay, we're looking at this other like 10 to 20% of people saying like, how can we rope them onto our team? And in that period,
it seems almost political at that point when you're looking to the stats and saying, all right, people, we got to bump up these numbers. These are rookie numbers.
Yeah. And boy, I promise I'm getting to your question. This is a very roundabout kind of way to get to it. But I really had to look outside. Like once I was in that place of being able to finally like really actually respect other people for who they are. I was able to respect other faith traditions for what they bring to the table without feeling threatened by, you know, this faith like taking over my own faith or whatever. And so one of the faith traditions that really spoke to me at that time was the tradition of Taoism, and I came across the Tao Te Ching and this really beautiful translation of it that had these beautiful black and white pictures, and so
for anyone who doesn't know the Tao Te Ching, it is one of the most accessible faith documents I think that is probably out there. It's very frequently and well translated. You can find it for free all over the place. I recommend it's really worth a look, and it'll give you a lot for the time it demands of you, which will be quite little.
Yeah, but it's also not the kind of thing that is like you sit down and read it through. Like it's a group of like 40, 50, 60, something like that.
It could go well as a daily devotional. I'm sure there's many very wise ways to approach it that I'm completely ignorant of. For sure.
So the thing that spoke to me about it was that it was so, how do I say this? It sort of doesn't make any sense. I mean, it does and it doesn't. Like it, like you read it and it's
most honest book review ever.
It didn't make any sense, but it also made total sense to me at the same time. And also at the time I was like coming to appreciate the, it's super cliche, but just the value and the truth of the yin yang symbol. I know that sounds ridiculous to say, but
it has been socially co-opted quite heavily. Would you like to walk us through the actual meaning as you understand it, so we can try to walk outside of that cultural appropriation issue we have here in the Americas? I don't know about anywhere else. I shouldn't project.
Yeah, well, I will say too that like all of this understanding, I don't know that I would have been able to really digest it if I was coming from my previous buttoned up space. Like I think I needed all the Legos on the floor in order to read the Tao Te Ching and be like, I'm
so glad that metaphor is holding up. We'll see how far it'll go.
Yeah, no, it's really helpful. And so, all right, so the Tao Te Ching is really full of it's basically a book of fairly short poems, and all throughout all of those poems, like there's this basic idea that dark can't exist without the light, or light can't exist without the dark. Like they define each other and they create each other. One cannot really exist without the other, right? I mean, yes, they can, but also they can't. And so this book really points to how integrated opposites are with each other. You know, we think of sometimes like how closely love and hate is related, how closely like, I don't know, again, like light and dark, or friends and enemies, that there's like some sort of connection there that makes you like have this emotional resonance towards this person. Whereas somebody who's not emotionally connected in that way will just be like, oh, it's whatever, it's that person. Like, but the recognition of how much the light and the dark define and need each other was so important to me, of just making sense of the world around me at that time, you know. And so then like reflecting on a lot of,
that's very different from the place you started, that sort of circular theology, I guess you might call it.
Right. And I think at that time too, I mean, I was looking at the Christian stories, and I'm looking at like, you know, God and Satan and heaven and hell and all these really sharp dichotomies where it's like either or. And I'm like, okay, now I can sort of understand like why it is that there, you know, worldwide, there's sort of this like basic human thing of balance, that there's so many things that exist in balance to another thing, and the interconnectedness of that, and at the same time also there was oh my God, since we're on dank Christian memes, there was one that I saw recently that just had me cracking up, where it was like one of those 4-panel ones with oh my God, please don't kill me, but her name is slipping me, Amidala from Star Wars, where
Okay.
the meme where
You're going to X, aren't you? Aren't you? Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so the first panel is Jesus being like, I saved everybody from being thrown in a pit of hell, in a pit of fire. And she's like, who's throwing him in the fire? And he's just smiling. And she's like, who's throwing them in the fire? And I was just like, oh my
Anakin's
God.
face is quite perfect for that.
It's great. Memes are a great education tool.
Seriously. And I was like, that is so apropos, and just like really like just spoke to me, that I'm like, this is so accurate, just in terms of like how when you're able to like get a little bit of distance, when you're able to not feel like your whole world is going to crumble if this one question goes one way, I think you're able to approach things with a little bit more humor, and which is partially why I think this community is so valuable, that there's space for that, where like so much of the Christian world is so armored up about like specific things that like, if it's not this way, then whatever. So getting back to music, so I think from
She did the thing.
So when through this this resonance that I was having at the time with the Tao Te Ching, when I got to Tallahassee to go to grad school, I drove past this this organization that had a sign that was called the Taoist Tai Chi Society, and I was like, Taoist Tai Chi, and I was like, I'm very interested. So I stopped in, and they're like, yeah, we do Taoist things. We mostly just do Tai Chi. And I was like, okay, cool. I guess I need to exercise. So I started practicing with them, and started practicing Tai Chi, and discovered that they don't really make a big deal of it, but in Tai Chi practice, all of the principles of Taoism are so alive. And there's really that the Tao Te Ching talks a lot about like the soft approach, and about the effectiveness of being like water in approaching things. That water can be so powerful and so gentle, and has all the dichotomies sort of wrapped up in it. And the movements of Tai Chi are in that same way, very sort of push and pull, gentle, but building strength. And so I gained so much from practicing Tai Chi, and I think really helped me. Like, it was a religious organization, but they didn't really make a big deal out of it. Like,
are Tai Chi and Taoism usually paired? Are they extensions of each other?
That's a good question. I am not sure how much Tai Chi is connected to Taoism in the wider world. I know that this particular Tai Chi organization kind of it takes the Taoism practice as part of the Tai Chi practice, and that's all kind of like wrapped up together. But I think, again, I'm not sure how much recognition there is of that worldwide. But they actually have, so this club that I went to, which was in the same town city as my grad school, happened to be in the national center for this organization. So this is a Tai Chi group that has branches in many cities across the US, and they all practice this one form of Tai Chi. They're actually in like 44 countries around the world. So it's really cool. You can fly to Spain and just like drop into a Tai Chi class. And as long as you have your t-shirt that like shows you're part of the club, like you can just like jump in, and they're practicing the same set, which is really awesome. And then after grad school, my brain was fried and I needed time off. And so I went and spent a couple months up at the International Center outside of Toronto. And that was a great experience. And they have a huge temple there that has like these various, they call them the three three religions temple where they have Confucius, Lao Tzu, and what's the other one? Buddha, I guess. But anyway, three of the main figures in Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. And I didn't go to the temple a whole lot, mostly because they did chanting at like 7 a.m, and that's way too early for me. So
that was a little early
not
for chanting.
and they approach chanting as almost like a health benefit. And I mean, it's in Chinese, so you don't even really know what you're saying. So I think that the value of that on a spiritual level, I mean, I don't know how valuable it is to say words that you don't understand. Like, I don't really believe in like.
Hey, we forget how long ago. It was only, I think, in the 1960s where Catholic masses stopped being performed in Latin for exactly the reasons you're discussing here. So
really?
It's definitely an issue. And I think when the Catholic Church recognizes it as an obstacle over and against their tradition, I think that's saying something.
Yeah, for sure. So I mentioned before that music was a big part of choosing our new church when we moved churches when I was in the 6th or 7th grade. And music was always a big part of my life in general, of just, I was always really drawn to it for whatever reason. I mean, I remember hearing like the original Jars of Clay album when I was in like probably middle school, and it like totally blew my mind. And I was like, oh my God, it was like I wore that CD out. And, and it was the first music that I really heard that was like really crafted with the music in mind first. Like, I feel like a lot of liturgical music is made primarily with like the words or like the lyrics in mind first, of like, I'm making a song to praise God, and like this.
Many of them are translated too. Yeah,
this is the thing that I want to say about God, and I'm going to put it to music. Whereas, the other approach where like you're making music for the sake of music, and it also happens to be spiritual because we're all spiritual beings. And it also has some, like, you can tell it's Christian music. It definitely has a lot of that kind of imagery woven in, but it's not music that you would listen to and be like, oh, this is Christian music immediately. You know what I mean? So when I was deciding to go to school, I was like, all right, I want to do something in music. Again, I later on found out about music therapy and decided to go to school for that. While I was in grad school for music therapy, I had well, let me also just back up and say, for anyone who doesn't know, music therapy is the practice of using music for some sort of non-musical purpose. So like when you go to a music lesson, you're learning music to try to gain the skill of playing music. But if you go to a music therapist, they're going to use music to help treat your anxiety, or help you get walking after a stroke, or help like a child with ADHD or autism or something, like learn skills, or like they're using music for some reason, some purpose that is not the music itself. And the music itself might be just part of the therapy. Like it might be the music itself is in the therapy serving some sort of purpose, and then you are talking for most of it. Like if you're doing lyric analysis with a music therapist, that might be an example of that, where you're listening to a song and then you're really just like diving into the lyrics, talking about why they're meaningful to you, what it reminds you of, like any of that, versus other forms of music therapy that practice that are using the music itself as the therapeutic element. Like if you're going to a guided imagery and music session run by a music therapist, you'll be listening to some sort of like complicated musical classical piece that will, and you'll be guided through like a imagery experience, and then talk about the imagery that came up for you, that the music evoked for you. So I've spent most of my music therapy career working with people with dementia, and also children in a hospital in a medical setting. I just returned to my work with people with dementia, which I really enjoy. Like I mean, I'm in my 30s now, and I like coming back to this work with people with dementia has been sort of a whole new like awakening for me in a way, because I didn't want to be a person that enjoyed working with old people. You know what I mean?
Can we talk a little bit about what dementia is? So like you worked in a children's hospital, and I think that we can imagine the sort of diversity of patients a music therapist might encounter in that sort of clinical hospital setting. But I'm guessing a lot of us aren't super familiar with dementia and or Alzheimer's, which are not quite the same thing, but they are frequently categorized together.
Right. So dementia is the umbrella term. Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. Dementia is generally a term that we use to describe changes in the brain and changes that specifically interfere with functioning and memory. And so Alzheimer's is the most common type of dementia. Some types of dementia are reversible. Like if you are experiencing dementia as a result of like alcoholism or like a TBI, it's possible that dementia, those kinds of dementia, sometimes medication related, those can be reversed or shifted. But most of the time when we're talking about Alzheimer's dementia or frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body dementia, those kinds are progressive and there's not currently a cure for it. And basically it over time takes away your ability to do various things. I mean, first, it's usually your ability to remember specific dates and people and like really fine details. And then over time, like every part of your brain is affected. So like eventually your walking and your speech and, at the end, even like your ability to sit up is affected. But throughout that process, I mean, it's really villainized. And I'm not trying to gloss over how heartbreaking that process is, but I think also there's a lot of joy in the space that people get to, like after they're able to sort of deal with the grief and the loss. They're able to really live in the moment. Like everything with dementia work is like right here, right now, what's happening, what are you feeling? And especially on a sensory level, like what are the noises in the environment? Like what are the people? And one of the last areas of the brain to be affected is the area that governs your emotions. And so even deep into dementia, people might not understand like specifically the sentence that you're saying to them, but they will understand how you're saying it. And they will understand that they're being talked down to. They will understand that somebody is being mean or like, holding their power or whatever it is. Those kinds of interactions do still resonate. And so, we see oftentimes like as people get further, like family members are like, oh, like, I don't want to go visit this person. They don't even know it's me. But I mean, most of the time they know that this is a person that I love and this is a person that's important to me. They may not remember your name, but they know like that you are like one of their people. You know what I mean? And so I think there's so much of dementia work that demands that we give up our own egos and confront our own fears about death.
On that note, someone said in comments, "What a beautiful career. I can imagine it makes you so much more compassionate and loving towards people." I think that's the job description.
Yeah, that literally is essentially the job description. And actually, so this organization that I went back to, I had worked before I went to the hospital. And originally I left because I'm like, oh, like I wasn't doing official clinical music therapy work. It wasn't like this, I mean, I was using my music therapy skills, but it was a little bit looser. Again, like everything is very much in the moment. So like if I'm gathering people for a music group, the way that the community feels when I first start to gather people from the way that the community feels when everybody's actually together, like might be very different. But I am also, again, I promise this is a very long route around to the music stuff. But so when I was in music therapy school, in grad school, I wanted to explain what music therapy is first, so that when I say this next part, it makes a little more sense. One of the classes in music therapy school is a repertoire class. So when you're training to be a music therapist, they train you as broadly as possible so that any kind of population that you get a job with working after school, that you have the basic skills to be able to like continue your training in that field. Because I mean, you might be working in a psychiatric hospital, you might be working in long-term care, you might be in private practice where you have kind of a mixed bag of all different kinds of clients. there's any number of situations you might end up in. And one of the questions I get a lot as a music therapist is like, what kind of music is best for, what kind of music is most therapeutic? And I think that comes out of our societal desire to have like a prescription. Like we have this prescription mentality. Like, tell me what music.
I know what my prescription would be. It's the original Wii shop music. Bop, 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 bada, bada, bop. That's going to be in my head.
Really? It's
when
not
there's nothing else left.
It's not the intro? Like that intro, though, it's like meditation. Like I feel at peace the moment I hear that weird, like...
If I don't realize it's a
sound.
loop, I think I could just be in perpetual love with the song.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. And for another person, that same song might completely send them over the edge because they might have an association with that song where like...
Because they spent too much money on the Wii Shop channel and it just reminds them of that rage and virus remorse.
Right. Or maybe
a lot
you
of
have
bad
a
titles
child
for that console.
Or maybe you have a child who is ignoring everything you say every time they're on the Wii Shop. And so that music just sends you into a rage because you need to physically go up the stairs and get your child's attention.
That was a very mom story. That was the mom's point of view on that.
That's just what popped into my head. I'm not a mom. I don't know. I mean, I'm a cat mom, but anyway, point of the story is that everybody's relationship to music is different, and everybody's relationship to, especially when you get down granular to each particular song, is different. For some people, classical music can be completely like transformational and send you like, into a blissful space. Whereas like other people, classical music makes you very anxious and very like, and, same with like heavy metal. Like heavy metal is like for some people is an expression of and a vetting of something that they feel inside. Whereas for other people, it makes them angry. Whereas for other people, it's like a valve where you're letting that out. So it has so much to do with that relationship. So as a music therapist in your training, part of what you're training to do is to learn to play as many different kinds of music as you possibly can so that whatever kind of client you're working with, you can play something that they like. So,
what a task.
Yeah, it is definitely quite a task. But I mean, like in the class, we learned like 40 or 50 songs, and it was like, all right, here's the top 5 requested songs in country. Here's the top 5 requested songs in oldies. Just enough to kind of get you started.
The ones that are likely to hit. One.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
good old
nice.
Summertime, Let Me Call You Sweetheart. It's
the hits. You got it. Once you know the hits, you can try to work with the locals.
Yeah, and I do still get like a definite sense of satisfaction when I like play like Daisy Bell for some older person with dementia who's in their 80s or 90s, and they're like, "How do you know that song?" And they're just like incredulous.
So we need a system for music therapists where each song, like the top hits, they're only a couple points, but if you can actually provide music therapy with someone for something obscure, that you get points, and that there's an annual champion. I think we can gamify this, make some rewards. We can do this.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of in that repertoire class, one of my assignments was to write a song in one of the styles that we had studied. So one of the styles that we had studied was Motown music, which is one of my favorites. And so it was like 100%, I'm all over that. I will write a song in that style. And I did. And after I wrote that song, I was like, there was something very important in that where I was like, wow, I was able to create something beautiful and contribute something beautiful to the world that didn't exist before. And there's this self-reflective piece of it too, that when you're writing music, you are taking the very specific experiences of your life and then also zooming out and asking like, how does this experience relate to the world as a whole? Like how is this specific experience of mine universal on a wider level? And then trying to write kind of with the specific and the universal in mind at the same time is like really part of what I love doing a lot. And I think is generally a good thing for songwriters to do, and really an effective method that lots of people have used. Like I not to say that, like, because there are many songs written that have like very specific stories, like especially in country music, like the song "A Boy Named Sue."
A lot of country music songs are in fact stories.
Right. Very specific stories.
Johnny
like,
Cash is a great example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that you mentioned that, storytelling. And I guess it was kind of like, it's totally related to your journey of finding story and using it as a therapeutic thing. Like, what kind of stories you feel that are most resonant with people?
I think that love stories, of course, are kind of always going to be a hit, because people generally, if you're not currently in love, everybody wants to be in love. It's something that you, is really like one of the experiences of human life in general that like most people would point to as being one of the most valuable aspects of their human existence.
It's universal.
Right. And so I think that those stories tend to connect really easily because lots of people can relate to that. And I think similarly, the loss of love is something that most people can relate to. There's lots of different, each of my songs kind of has its own way of coming into existence. It's like usually coming out of a specific experience, and there's like some sort of words or some sort of general idea, or even like a general musical lick or some sort of pattern that I'm playing with that I really love, and then sussing out, okay, like, what does this pattern feel like? What does it remind me of? What kind of experiences have I had that this particular chord or this particular pattern is drawing up in me internally, and then how, like, how do I find words for that?
It sounds almost like deconstruction for music.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I have a very long catalog of voice memos of just like different ideas that pop up, and like 95% of them don't turn into anything. It's just like an idea that I had. Well, I mean, a lot of them are driving in my car, so like I played and it's like, I'm like,
I've been there. I got about 100 unwritten songs that I've started.
Yes. And I know.
This is Cruel Angel, by the way. Cruel Angel, why don't you take an opportunity to introduce yourself, and then we'll talk more when we get to the open question portion.
Oh, yeah. Sure. I'm Cruel Angel. Honestly, I don't really come from a point of anything to do with the Christian memes thing or Christianity. I'm just some guy, I guess.
He likes to chill with us, and it just so happens that your username is on theme, and we like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of partially a reference to Neon Genesis Evangelion, but then that's kind of got like
all right, we should do a checkpoint on this, because you are usually with us when we do our casual Sunday conversation, right?
Yeah.
We need to do a casual Sunday episode on Evangelion. I think we can make this happen.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Evangelion anyway, it's like, well, it's basically the whole thing is religious subtext. So it's weird.
Well, I think that's good. We'll put a pin in that. We'll come back to it. So, Olive, I wanted to. So you've talked a lot about how you've used music to heal, and that you've almost sort of deconstructed music and tones and chords in ways to try to, see what their emotional resonance is. Now, how does that experience relate to your creative process when you're writing music for the rest of us? Which, a reminder to everyone that Olive of Olive Tiger is the one who creates and legally sanctions our intro and outro music.
Yes, indeed. So I I mean, I don't think that we have, well, I mean, never say never, but the vast majority of human experiences are things that we share together, things that, as isolated as we feel. I think it's pretty rare that humans have some sort of feeling or thought that no other human has. And so I feel like I go through a process where when I'm writing music about something in particular, it is about me, but it's also not about me, recognizing that, again, like a big driver of my current spiritual life has been like, how can I live the truth that truly I am equal to everyone else. I am no better than anyone else, and I am no worse than anyone else. And so many of us struggle with that really basic understanding that, like, human beings as a whole,
Christians especially. Sorry, I have to highlight as the pastor in the room. It's a bit of a stereotype, and it's a stereotype for a reason.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard when you have a system that by nature says that I'm going to heaven and you're not, like, I think it's very hard to separate. I mean, I think it's possible to still have the view that everyone's equal. I think if your focus is on who goes to heaven and who doesn't, that those theologies are there to select. But when you're not so focused on everyone else's salvation and maybe just your own, that's perhaps a different task. Right. Yeah, and I don't know if this, I mean, maybe this is moving away from the topic a little bit, but I feel like there's so much in, like, looking back from my former belief system, how many of my beliefs are still with me, but look different than they used to.
Oh, interesting.
Like, for instance, I've really, the belief that, like, Jesus is in my heart, or like that idea, is something that I do believe now, but I don't think it's just Jesus. I think it's like spirit, God is in all of our hearts, and whether or not we wanted to, like, he's already there. I mean, I use the term he loosely, but like, spirit is already in our hearts, whether or not we acknowledge it, because we are spirit just by nature of being alive. I think that is wrapped up in just the fact that we are conscious, period, that our consciousness and our energy is divine, and that governs so much of my current belief. I'll use the term system loosely, but because it's always an ongoing process. Like, my faith now is something that's alive and something that can be changed, and something that, as I continue throughout my life, I will encounter new things that will shape what I believe. But I think that my practice of Tai Chi and my understanding of the ways that we use energy and what energy means to me as a concept sort of points me towards, like, my current belief system is kind of similar to, like, the Force in Star Wars a little bit. That sounds cheesy to say, but
I've frequently said that the Holy Spirit is not so different from the Force, right, other than the Holy Spirit's physical deeds are not physically present usually.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like all of I don't have, I'm not in a place where I have, like, every single part of my belief system, like, neatly ironed out and figured out. And I think a big part of the journey has becoming okay with that. Because at first it was extremely uncomfortable to be like, to move from a place where you have everything figured out to getting into a place where you're comfortable with not having everything figured out. And I think that's one of the biggest things, like, even as I try to understand the term faith in general, of what is it that requires faith versus what are things that are the church is just deciding is a thing. You know what I mean? Like, I think the belief in God is something that comes down to faith. It's not going to be something that you're going to be able to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt. Like I said before, the same way that somebody who doesn't believe in God will see evidence for that everywhere. and
I think a lot of
that's
people
what
who
makes.
come from. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's what makes faith. Like if you can totally prove every single little corner of everything you believe, then like where's the faith in that? You know what I mean? So I think it's oftentimes
Right.
presented as this bad thing that like, oh, we need to find evidence for existence in God. But like, I've gotten so much more relaxed about that. I'm like, people are going to believe what they believe, and it's not my job to convince them. And I think that release of that responsibility has lifted so much anxiety off of my shoulders that I'm like, it's important for me to live my life in a way with integrity and in a way that is moral, in a way that treats other people the way that I want to be treated. But it is not my responsibility whether or not someone goes to this like hypothetical heaven that like, who knows if it actually exists, you know, like again, it's one of those things where like, that's a thing of faith. Like you have to accept that part of your belief system is on faith. And that's a beautiful thing about that.
I think that's what some people who come from creedal traditions struggle with, that they do believe things, but they are told that their creed is the thing. Well, you must believe each of these tenets and you're out. And these tenets weren't written up by someone sitting in a pew. They were written up by some, bishop hundreds, perhaps thousands of years ago, or 8,000 years ago. And that's, difficult to resonate with people. And I think people, like you've said, they want to find what's essential to their faith and not pick up extemporaneous things that they then feel they have to be responsible for or defend or something like that.
Right. Yeah. And I think allowing people to kind of like do their own thing and believe what they believe is so important.
Yeah. And I also wanted to add like another question to that, because me personally, when I think about this process of faith and stuff, there's also the process of like losing it, and then there has to be like, when that happens, there's either two things, right? There's either like you go downhill and you just go no longer believing, then you go through the process of healing and coming back. I personally, there's never been a conversation, mainly when those who lose it will then just kind of like, they're gone, they're not, they're lost in their own way, some try to come back. But I personally find it more useful to find things that help you form your own process of healing, and then for coming to your own how do you tackle with faith in your own way, the way that makes sense to you, right? Because you're talking about this journey, right, of you looking through different texts and you going through different things, releasing yourself from the burden of converting others. I like that a lot. So what, in terms of maybe you can look back and either through your music or through your own experiences, what things you found the most useful to kind of like, I guess, heal yourself going through something difficult?
I feel like the music has been such a powerful tool to process and integrate and digest my experiences, which I think is in tandem with what people mean when they say healing, is being able to make sense of where you've come from and where you're going, and like what makes sense about where you've been and what you want to bring forward with you, and what is no longer working for you and what doesn't make sense to you anymore. And so I think that there's something on a physical level that music does for me that can be hard to describe. But I think it started when I started practicing Tai Chi. I started recognizing how I don't know, I had this new sense of body awareness that I had never had before, but like in a good way, because, the way that I was raised, like the body was always talked about as something that's going to lead you astray, something that is going to be bad or whatever.
Purity culture.
Yes.
Purity culture, big time. For those who don't know, purity culture is Christian orthodoxy that tells you what you should and shouldn't be doing with your own body, whether it's drugs or sex before marriage or wherever you fall on the issue of masturbation, that is part of a purity culture. And as Olive was describing, many, pastors and teachers and parents are encouraging people to be quote unquote pure Christians.
Right. And yeah, the purity culture that was present at the time when I was growing up, I think is a little better now. I mean, it's definitely still there for sure. The echoes of it, but it wasn't until I started practicing Tai Chi that I started realizing that my body and my sensory experience is a way that I can connect with God, and that practice of paying attention to, I mean, especially in Tai Chi practice, you are, it's really the practice of paying attention to ever increasing subtleties in the body of like how I'm turning my hips and my particular like foot placement, and, raising my arm to this level versus this level can feel totally different. Whereas, when you're first starting, you're just learning to like where to put your hands and stuff. But like, but over time, it's like an onion where you're like peeling back the layers and working deeper and deeper in the body, and your awareness of your internal body becomes more and more refined. And so I feel like the practice of Tai Chi kind of started me on that path where I had this recognition of physical experience, just like literally being alive and paying attention to like what's happening inside my body, and realized that like, wow, I've been trained to completely ignore what's happening with my body. Like I've lived like completely denying the sort of the fact that I had a body at all. You know what I mean? It just was not part of my my consciousness. Like I had the feeling of like floating around most of the time.
I think that this is something that's incredibly common in Christianity, and I think it's particularly evident from our Savior, who literally put the body on the line for everything. And I think that leads to, we have a number of hostile to the body teachings, definitely a degradation of the physicality in many ways. And then there's churches who don't discuss it at all, which is its own kind of invalidating and problematic. So I just wanted to take a moment to point that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, that's been, I can't, that is something that I am still trying to digest and still trying to heal from, because I'm still discovering at 36 years old, all different kinds of ways where that is still something that I'm working through in my life. And I think that practice, once I brought that awareness back to my music, I was suddenly able to exist in the music in a way that I hadn't been able to before.
Well, and do we want to consider segueing to some of your music, or is now not a good time for that? Whatever works for you.
Yes, but I do want to read something first before we go there.
You have a prepared statement?
I do have a prepared statement on the subject.
This isn't about our legal standing to use your music, is it? Because I don't have it present or at all.
No, you are 100% welcome to use my music, and I appreciate that you are using my music.
Now we have it on recording. Gotcha.
Yes.
Gotcha.
I just wanted to read a quote from, so back in like 2015, we had just finished recording our first record, which was the first record was released.
Who is we, for those who don't know?
Sorry. We is my band, Olive Tiger. We had recorded our first album, was released in 2016, and ironically was called Until My Body Breaks. Speaking of the body. And our next set of records, which we are in the middle, we released Softest. So the series is called Softest Eyes, which began with side A. So we're releasing them in sides. So side A was released last year. Side B is coming in October, and side C will be released next year. But after we finished recording the first record, we were invited to
I have to jump in. You do know that records only have two sides, right? You can't just make up a side C. There's rules here.
It's going to be a double LP, okay?
This is anarchy.
And I should, I guess, mention that like in the music world, the term record is often used interchangeably with album. So it's not necessarily a vinyl record, but I did find that very confusing in the beginning. Thank you for mentioning that. Anyway, so we were invited to take over this blog for a week, and we had literally just finished recording the first record. Like the final notes were finished like the day before. And I was trying to write about why music was so important to me. And I wrote this, which I'll read next, which I think sums up a lot of like where I've arrived to with music as a spiritual practice. So I wrote, because sometimes when I play music, every fiber of my being vibrates and expands and brims until the immensity of existence pours from my eyes and time slows down and the breath leaving my body extends from every cell. And at that moment, nothing else exists.
Wow.
And I feel that was really beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. And I feel like that what I'm describing in that moment is an experience of transcendence. And I think that we are able to reach that state of transcendence through all kinds of different ways. And I think sometimes that's used interchangeably with the idea of flow. You know, it's something that you can, I think the original book was written about like tennis and reaching a state of flow while playing sports or video games or like anything where your attention is like completely immersed in something. But I think that there's something really special about playing music in general and at least in my body, the way that I experience on a sensory level that vibration and that it feels like a cleansing and it feels like a healing. And to me, that circles back to why music has been so important in churches for so long, because it has this ability to bring us to this transcendent space.
Yeah, definitely.
So with that, we can segue into the next piece, which is I had wrote a song. Broclen suggested that we maybe share one of the songs during this Reddit talk. And so the song that I wanted to share is called The Choir. And I thought might resonate with this community and is a song that I originally started writing as an invitation to spirit, to my muse, to like whatever that force is that brings creativity, which is, you know, some spiritual force in my understanding. And I was feeling kind of disconnected, like having a bit of writer's block, and wanted to write something that I could sing when I wanted that connection to spirit and wanted to invite my muse or whatever to come and visit. And so I started writing this song. 3 years later, I finished it and had several finished, quasi-finished versions before
fully
that.
Baked song. Fully baked.
Oh, God, I've been there.
Oh my God. Yeah. And some songs come out in 20 minutes and it's beautiful when that happens. But most of the time there's a lot more struggle involved where like, you like this part, but this part doesn't quite feel right and blah, blah, blah. And you go back and forth and getting the song to a point where like everything feels right and feels like it's in its place and feels good and feels like, yes, this is the thing that needs to be there. I have no control over how long that takes. I mean, I do have some control over how long that takes because I can put a certain amount of time and energy into it. But generally it's like you just kind of have to take the song at whatever pace it's coming at and whatever pace spirit is feeding the different elements to you. So this song like originally started with that spirit. And at the time, the No Ban, No Wall protests were going on because Trump was doing his thing and, trying to kick people out. And I was like, this is the most, I don't know, to me, borders and boundaries in general just like don't make sense. I mean, I know they make sense for some things, but anyway, go ahead.
I was going to say it was like the most non-gamer moment out there.
Yeah. So I was really, I mean, not like personally impacted by that because, you know, I'm a white person that doesn't have any international relatives or anything like that. So it wasn't, but it was impacting me on a spiritual level and so that the song started to take on some language that that was mirroring some of that situation. And then there was also just the idea behind it of just like connection in general of like, how do we reach out to another person and connect with another person? So I really love how this song came out. This is from Softest Eyes side A, which is available on Spotify and all the places that you might find it, Apple Music and, you know, all the places. But yeah, I guess we can hear it unless anybody has any other questions about it.
We're ready. All right. So we're gonna take a little musical break, and then when we come back, we're gonna move towards our question and answer conversation portion. So again, this is The Choir by Olive Tiger off their album Softest Eyes, side A.
Send me all your secrets. I'll send you my open ears. Lift me up from the everyday rhythms, the everyday rhythms, the everyday rhythms. Take me to your country. I'll bring with me my open heart. Lift your voice through the chaos and clatter. The chaos and clatter. The chaos and clatter. Wait to the waves of the stereo. Wait to the waves of the stereo. This is my sanctuary and we are the choir. This is my sanctuary and we are the choir. 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 We are the choir.
All right, that was The Choir by Olive Tiger. So we are back. Our friend, we've lost a friend. Hopefully he'll return to us.
Angel,
so we're
please.
gonna be moving on to our Q&A portion. So just a reminder, this is Dank Christian Memes. We are a place for all kinds of Christians and all kinds of non-Christians. We've just had our lovely discussion with Olive of Olive Tiger and have been able to sample her music, which will also be the music on our intros and outros. So thank you very much, Olive, for both being here and for giving us your music, essentially.
Of course, I appreciate, the time and energy that anyone takes to listen. It's such an important thing for me to do in my own life. And there's something that feels like it comes full circle when it's like received and listened to. And so I have such a deep appreciation for that. Thank you.
And thanks for sharing so much with us. So I think now, Void Boy, would you like to, in a briefer format, speak to your faith journey a little bit, or would you rather I go first?
I'll be really brief. I was, I guess right now I feel like it's like everyone, right? It's an elastic thing. I was born and raised as a Jehovah's Witness. I'm no longer in it, but I was in it for like about 14 years. And through that, I've, learned a lot about, how to read scripture and how someone, expressing their faith and talking to a lot of people about, their faith. And I have to do a lot of that because, the preaching. I had a falling out. I realized that I had a more issue with the organization itself because the leadership did something that it was like too egregious for me to be comfortable participating. Yeah,
I'm sure you're not the only one who's had such an experience. It's a little
right.
common, sadly.
Right, and it was just too much, right? And I realized that it was too rigid, and how it was being expressed, like the faith and how it was being expressed and how they wanted you to express it was too narrow. And I realized that this is just something I can't do it honestly. And that's where I've told this story a bunch of times, but it was really, Olive's talked about, expressing it authentically, right? Expressing faith authentically and living it in an authentic way that is not, it's not coerced by anybody. And that's where it hit me. I was like, okay, this is definitely not conducive to where I am. And I essentially left it. It was at a cost, it came at a cost. My family stopped talking to me. I've lost all my friends because they were all from the same religion as I am.
That's so because they make you invest so completely in their community, so that to step outside of their community is to basically lose your world.
Yeah, and essentially they just take everything. It's like, okay, you give us everything, and if you leave, we take everything. It was a zero-sum game, and it was terrible. And I had to just kind of rebuild myself. First things first, I just went full-blown into atheism, like zero belief. I don't, and just like, again, like this conversation, you want to look for evidence of God, you will find a lot of it. If you want to look for the evidence of the absence of God, you will find a lot of it. And I found like a lot, and I overindulge in it. And then later, I think this happens to a lot of people. You kind of cool down, you simmer down, and you really want to be like, there's still something in you that is not. That's something
we see at Dank Christian Memes. We see commenters who are like, I used to be fervently, and I think it happens for hardcore atheists and hardcore Christians, that they used to be hardcore about it all the time, and they've experienced a chilling out over the years. So it's nice, I like to, so we did something a little crazy as a subreddit. We actually removed everyone who had been banned over the course of 7 years. We did our jubilee and freed everyone from their debts, hoping that some folks have chilled out. and we haven't seen a huge spike in people getting banned. So maybe they have, or maybe they just don't use Reddit anymore. So maybe that's good too.
It's
Yeah,
the
and I
nature,
just-
right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I just wanted to toss in there too that like thanks for sharing your story first of all, and I think it's so important to recognize that in that deconstruction journey, I think it's so the people in your community. It's hard to know that the people in your former community are watching you, being like, "Wow, like look where you got now," and like, and it's and it's so important.
Accurate. That's what my church always sounded like to me.
Oh man, I mean, you don't know.
Yeah, no, seriously. And I mean, I'm grateful that for me, there was a natural split of like this questioning for me came at a time when I was already in a shift of like going to college. And, there was already, I mean, it was still painful when I went home at like holidays and whatever, that like it felt very weird to be in my parents' church again. And I eventually had to stop going because the preacher wouldn't stop saying crap from the pulpit. But I remember at Broclen, I called you one day after like this particular time where I was like, I'm never coming back here. But, anyway, but just going back to Void Boy's story, I just wanted to sort of say thank you for sharing, and also that like it's so important for us to remember that like people ending up in a particular place doesn't mean they're going to stay there forever.
Right.
And most of us in a deconstruction process, I mean, maybe not most, maybe that's an overgeneralization, but a lot of us end up in a place where we're like, well, I don't know if there's a God. And like, that's an important place to be before you start building things back stronger.
Yeah, I think there's some people out there that, we've talked about having all the, you have your faith and it's maybe built out of Legos, and, sometimes a piece gets knocked off and maybe you can build it upright like it was, or maybe the whole thing has been obliterated. And, I think there's a benefit to being able to see all the pieces, all the components of your faith, of your theology, of your religion, however you look at it, and to say, aha. And I think there's usually a recognition that, you can reassemble these things under a number of different principles, or perhaps multiple principles. At once. Again, if that's an endeavor you choose, there are many options, and I think one is just walking away. And I think a lot of people need to do that for a time too, where it's just been so hot, regardless of what side of the argument they've been on, that they need to walk away. Mm-hmm. And I think that can be a noble move as well.
Yeah, I mean, to me at least, there's been there's like comfort levels, right? And there are things that I realize that make sense to me, things that are comfortable to me to like, explore in that, when you're going through that deconstruction process. And I think I like being in comfort zones, and it's hard for me to like, go out of it and reach out.
I hope we can be your comfort zone, boy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't like like I said earlier, I flounder a lot, right? I wouldn't say I would call myself a Christian from any denomination, because I don't go anywhere. I don't practice, but I do still find the study of Christianity and theology is something important to me still, and that hasn't left. I was Jehovah's Witness, sure, but I think deep down I was like, I'm deeply interested in this. This is something that means a lot to me. And just because I'm no longer part of that organization, that doesn't negate any of the feelings or of the studying I've made and the dedication. That's like, I'm 29, and 14 years out of 29, that is a lot.
It's a significant hunk there. Yeah.
It's a significant chunk, and that will never go away. And I don't call it wasted. There's still a lot in the back of my mind. That is like life wasted. Half of your life is wasted. And no, not really. You just have to like, this is part of your path, right? This is part of your process. It's needed to happen some way, somehow, for you to really find who you truly are. And I feel like I will be in this process of finding, discovering, researching, reading, for a lifetime, and I think that's, for a lot of people, they have to think about this. This is not like a one and done thing. This is a lifetime thing. You will be constantly processing your faith, expressing your faith, and going in and out forever because it's elastic, right? It's not rigid.
It's
like a lot of
alive.
people think it is. Yeah, it's alive.
Well, and I think that, there's a good number of folks on Dank Christian Memes who have found themselves in between places in all sorts of ways and in all sorts of circumstances. And that's, I think it's important to acknowledge that as a valid part of faith, that's the journey and wherever you're at. However, I need to be faithful to the comments because I haven't been faithful to the comments and I will be chastised. A lot of these are not questions, and some of these are questions about why are there two Broclens? Because I log in from my computer because my cell phone can't be trusted entirely. So yeah. You are chill people. I'm glad I found you. Oh, that's very nice. Anytime I feel better than someone else, I tell myself that I am not better because I believe in God. I am not better than anyone else, not even a murderer. That seems a little. Maybe not in God's eyes, but in my eyes, I'm glad you're not a murderer. It makes a significant difference to me.
You should still not
and I
murder.
don't want you to not feel motivated to continue not murdering. So keep it up.
I love that.
You're doing great. All right. Could you provide a brutally honest rating on my post? Thank you. Well, this post is very kind and sweet, polite, and grammatically correct. So I give it 5 stars. I'll give it an upvote too. I don't see any reason, unless you're talking about a different post. Sorry, in that case. Someone said, I don't believe I know he's real. I imagine they're talking about Jesus. Someone said, what's up? Hello. Someone has a big question about I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I am going to read the big question at the end. Are the commandments revelation or man-made? I think they're talking about the 10 commandments. I would say probably both. And I imagine that's not a satisfying answer for you.
Oh no.
So we can. Do you guys want to rein in on this one quickly so we can keep on our theme?
Yes. Someone who studied I wouldn't call myself a scholar, but I read a lot, and I read a lot of multiple perspectives on Christianity. Something really cool is that both things can be true at the same time.
Yes.
And this happens a lot, even in the sciences. There's this idea.
That's what I've been saying. Oh, I love when you guys preach my sermons. This is wonderful.
Even in the sciences, there's this book called Evolution. I think called Freedom Evolves, where it talks about compatibility. Where, yes, there could be an immortal soul also living in a world where there isn't, right? Two things can live at the same time and both be true, because the reality is that we don't have, when it comes to things that we can't measure, we can't look at it and point at it. Look, it's there. We have to come to almost like a consensus, they both have to coexist some way, and it's through reading more and meditating more and getting more understanding is that, we'll get further to that direction. But yeah, I agree. The answer is that they're both true.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is that the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function.
It's that last part that's the trick.
One should, for example, be able to see that things are hopeless, yet be determined to make them otherwise. From F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. All right. So I think we answered that comment pretty well, and we've got only one left. Can we put on Jesus is King album by Kanye West? First of all, legally, no.
Copyright.
But if you experience the divine or a spiritual, if you have a positive spiritual experience listening to Jesus is King by Kanye West, that's great. That's valid. I imagine that's what Kanye had in mind. So yeah, enjoy that. But no, legally we cannot play it here.
I just want to say.
Go ahead, boy.
No, I just want to say that Kanye's expression of faith is valid. As goofy as he is as a person, I genuinely think that what he's doing is a genuine expression of faith, and I find that amazing.
You know who else's expression of faith is legitimate and amazing?
Who?
Lil Nas X. Boom!
Yes.
I said it. I went there. Boom.
You did it. I'm proud of you, fam.
I know, so edgy. No one saw it coming. Incredible. So we are in our casual discussion Q&A portion. Now that we're actually open to people coming up, no one is raising their hands. So if you do want to come up, ask a question, or share an experience, go ahead. I'm going to talk about myself a little bit. Is it okay if I talk about my faith journey a little bit?
Yes.
Ooh. Okay, yes.
Void Boy knows me too well. That we've crossed the line, and now we can't go back. Void Boy's got me figured out and feels comfortable doing me, and that's what I need. That's good. That'll keep me humble. But I'm actually going to start by talking about my family, which is pretty rare. But my mother was a Roman Catholic, an Irish Catholic, in fact. And my father was a Lutheran. And nowadays we might not think a lot of that, but then it was kind of a big deal. And they couldn't find a church to get married. So they ended up going to the United Church of Christ, which is the church, the denomination that I was raised in. It's congregational, which means we vote. We vote on our pastors. We vote on our rules. We vote on our bylaws. We vote on our budgets. Which means that we have high potential for church politics. In fact, almost a guarantee for it. So, democracy is actually like a core value of congregational churches. Many of them, at least, because they could vote not to be congregational anymore. That's part of how it works. They can also vote to affiliate. So the church I was a student minister in was a federated church, part UCC, so that's the tradition I came from, and part United Methodist. So I come from a position, that really believes in, blending faiths and getting to know people and finding out what you have in common, and seeing if it's, more than you have that isn't in common. So that's always been really core to my faith. And I think part of the reason is I grew up in a very challenging environment. I lived in an abusive and neglectful home, and that's just very difficult. But I always found the church to be a place that was empowering and encouraging, a place that was generally safe. And that was really good and really to my benefit. I got to learn how to, read in public, do speaking. I gave my first sermon when I was a teenager. So I had a lot of great opportunities. But while I was having these great opportunities, the people my age, my friends, were leaving the church in droves. So I'm going to pause in my story a little bit here. Did you guys have any experience? I think all of you talked about a church in your story that legit closed down because it didn't have enough people. Void Boy, is the proselytization with Jehovah's Witnesses trying to make up for a loss, or is it just a core component of the faith regardless of what attendance and membership numbers are?
Yes. It is the main component of the faith. I would say it's the only point. If you're a Jehovah's Witness,
do they lose members? Is it pretty
absolutely
uncommon for someone like you to head out, or is that happening? So that's a problem they're dealing with as well.
Yeah, it's I would say it's fair, and I think that's fair to say with many other denominations. They're having the same issue. Jehovah's Witness, they do a lot of tracking with the numbers, like how many members they have worldwide, and they break it down almost to local level. It's kind of crazy. But here's a really interesting thing. Every year they do this book where they break down the numbers of membership globally, and they break it down from country to country, region to region, and it's just to kind of tally up what and basically telling what the good work's been going on. We've done so and so many members in this part of the world. Cool. They stopped doing that.
Oh no! So they used to have an annual report, and now they don't publish it because it doesn't look good no more.
Exactly. It would reveal that there is a drop.
That's not a good look. Oh no!
Not a good look. No. And it was hovering around globally. It's around 8.2 million. I don't know what the number is anymore because they're not. Nowadays they're showing a lot of the 8 million, which is also kind of telling. They were very proud of the 0.2 for a while. And, it is an issue. And of course,
everybody likes number go up. I think a big part of the internet and social media is because human brain like number go up.
Yeah.
So I feel like Jehovah's Witnesses like really probably tapped into that a little earlier than some of the rest of us.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's and that is also reflective of a lot of the, I guess they would call it spiritual food, right? A lot of the proselytation, or like what they teach the membership, is more of a, go out there and convert
that you go to that state college and you make believers of all of those students, because that's what God calls you to do.
You know what? That is a very radical.
Which I'm sorry.
Because even in Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't tell us to do that. They tell us do not go to college. But it's super
logical, right? Why wouldn't you go to the largest concentration and shoot your shot? And like, statistically speaking, you should have some marginal level of success. I think one of the big problems that a lot of Christians and others probably don't realize is that these movies that Christians buy about the atheist finding Christianity, that's exceptionally rare, especially for people who were raised as atheists. Statistically, that doesn't happen. But if people are looking for the fertile ground, well, we talked about people who move through atheism as a part on their larger faith journey. Obviously, that's different. But oh no, I lost my spot.
We got you, fam. Also, this is I think I can say that it's open. So if y'all want to join and say words, raise that hand.
If you're looking to win people to your faith, the statistical category of people is not those who say they have no faith or are atheist or are agnostic, but is those who answer that they are, quote, nothing in particular. That these are people who have a much more fluid view of faith and belief, and possibly even ideas in general, that these are the people that are you're likely to have success with. The problem is nothing in particular as a statistical category in the United States tend to be a bit off the grid, but a bit aloof, a bit hard to get in touch with. So, it's not as though it's super easy, but, converting atheists who were born and raised atheists in mass is not realistic, but I'm told it is the subject of a bunch of Christian movies. So the last thing I wanted to mention about my faith journey, which, I noticed when I was a teenager, that while the church was building me up and really helping me develop myself in a lot of ways, that a lot of people were not having that positive experience, especially people my age. And the UCC is, considered a mainline denomination, which, Congregationalism is usually considered mainline. But like all the others, they are declining. And I think people my age were the first ones when I was a teenager. And I paid a lot of attention to that. And I noticed that, and that troubled me. And, I didn't necessarily want to go and win them back, because I imagine they all had very valid reasons for leaving. But I wanted to know more about that process and why it was happening. So it led me to really be interested in people who are typically called unchurched, for either, they never were a church person, or they're not attending a church in any meaningful way. And at times on Dang Christian Memes, it's hard to know what we have more of. Do we have more people who are churched, Christians who might say, I go to X church on Sunday, or tune into this church on online service, or are they I keep losing it, guys. I'm struggling here.
We got you, no worries.
I think that, for me, something that was so important is watching these people start to leave Christianity and saying that's important. And I think for a long time, people didn't see that as important. So for me, ministering in digital spaces where there's a large number of folks who maybe aren't Christian is really important to me. And I think that a lot of churches have almost a hostile view of those who have left over the decades, rather than, maybe a merciful view, maybe a compassionate view. So I like that Dang Christian Memes is,
or even
is
a
meeting
curious
place.
view of like why.
Right. But
Yeah.
I like it, like that there's a meeting place where, those groups can share. And like I said, it's hard to tell day to day, post to post on Dang Christian Memes. Do we have more churched people or unchurched people? And how much fluidity is there among folks in our community?
Yeah, because I think there's not a lot of communication happening from, let's say, from church to church, denomination to denomination.
No, we don't see a lot of dialogue. It's when we do see dialogue, it's like a bit of a unicorn.
Right. And it's super rare. And I think there has to be, I think there used to be a tradition of having multiple faiths come together and just actually discussing. I think the last instance we have is probably the Council of Nicaea, and that is like medieval times.
I was going to say, just not recently, not recent.
Recent, yeah, it's a relative. so that's like to give an idea of how, like, Jesus Christ, this hardly ever happens amongst Christians.
So I want to go back to the State College, and Olive, I'd love to hear a response to this. I think that there's something very honest about thinking that this was a great place to win people over to Jesus. But I think that there were also like a number of other Christians in the community who recognized that they could be part of the larger community. They could see and be seen and, welcome people in accordingly. But they also had more to gain by playing nice with others, with other, faith groups, whether they be Christian or otherwise. So, I hope that there are Christians who, used to prioritize, proselytation or outreach or however you describe it, who are more interested in joining a table of equals, so to speak, where we all have our home base we return to, but here's where we can celebrate and make the best of what we have in common.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that with the place that I was coming from at the time, there really wasn't any space for that. Because it was really like a matter of like, are you like me? If not, how can I make you like me? And for your own good, for your own good.
We're helping you. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yes, I'm helping you. And there's really that. I really had that view that it was for the other person's best interest. You know what I mean? Like. So I don't think that I personally would have had the space to be able mentally and emotionally to I wasn't. I mean, if we're talking like when I first got there, I wouldn't have had the space.
I just mean in general. I don't want to tie you down to a past self or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would love that now. Like now, that would be something that I would be very interested in. Just because I'm much more interested now in like people in general. Where did you come from? What do you believe? Why do you believe that? What influenced, like, who were the people in your life that led you to believe that? Why does that make sense to you? Like that, all of those questions are way more interesting to me now than, had I asked those questions in my before life, it would have been really just angling to convince them of something that I believe.
I find that to be a much more deep and satisfying investigation, conversation, question to ask yourself than, does God exist? Yes or no? This is how I will determine if you are stupid or not. Like that's there's a lot of people who go through that, but I think there's a lot more of us who are like, well, we've been through that. We don't need to rehash that stuff. There are deeper, more interesting questions to ask and answer.
Yeah, like, I mean, to me, the question of whether or not there is a God is kind of a boring question to me at this point. I'm like, I'm not super interested in that. Like, I want to know why.
As a moderator, I remove memes that don't talk about Christ or Christianity, but are just based on that argument because they're not Christian. They're just defending the concept of a deity, which in itself is not a religion.
Right.
And some questions aren't meant to be solved, right? Like, this is not a question that demands an answer. There isn't one.
Yeah. Well, there's like in my now life, I have so much more like space and appreciation for those questions, and I think the value of those questions is so much greater than it ever used to be. You know, like the question itself is valid of why do you believe that? Or why does that make sense to you that way? What does that say about you as a person? Like it's not about the pressure of trying to convert somebody anymore.
Well, and I think that as we watch church membership decline, and people who are trying to win people over, statistically, it's not going well. It doesn't seem like the winning strategy.
Yeah, and I think so when I was in Tallahassee, I visited a Unitarian church that I really loved. I know. My gosh.
The stereotypes for Unitarians can be a bit fierce in some parts of the country.
For sure. And I think a lot of them are probably deserving, but but nonetheless, I think from that place, it was a really valuable community for me to be involved with. But the thing that I appreciate the most about Unitarians that I really haven't seen in a lot of other churches is that they are so focused on doing practical things to help other people, like actually putting the money of their church into actually helping other people. And I know that like other churches do some like soup kitchens and stuff like that, but
them as an institution are not solely dedicated to those efforts. They are one of their many functionaries.
Right. And so I really appreciate that about the Unitarian community in general. I haven't yet found a Unitarian community in Connecticut that I vibed with in the same way. And I don't know if that was just because of like where I was at the time, but also the Unitarian group that I visited here when I moved back was sort of in a transitional time themselves. I think their pastor had just left and they had like some lay people that were kind of taking over sermons in the meantime, which was kind of a weird place to visit. But
that's tricky.
Yeah. So I might go back and visit sometime soon and see how it's gotten where they've arrived.
That's nice to do, to just put your foot in the door and be like, oh, how's everyone doing here? Just checking in.
Have you all seen
just do a
yet?
check-in? Like, hello.
This is a wellness check. Are you guys doing okay in here?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, at this point, it would be nice for them to check in because, Jesus, it gets concerning out there. It's hard out there.
Yeah.
I feel like Unitarians would be like, I need to find a Unitarian person to have on our podcast here. You are guest 2, Olive. Guest 3 is a friend of mine from seminary who is a real minister or a analog minister, but he or a traditional minister, you might say.
Analog minister.
Analog minister. Someone said that in one of our other chats, and I thought that was pretty interesting. It feels insulting though, like, oh, you're an analog minister. Okay, let me get you your typewriter.
You're not like me, the shiny ones, the new virtual ones.
But I would love to have. I feel like Unitarians are a really interesting group when it comes to their beliefs and like you said, their practice. Yeah, I would be great to interview one. If you find one, will you catch them for me, like a fairy in a jar?
Sure.
So I can interview them, or ask
absolutely.
politely.
I mean,
I'll give you a business card, or something. I guess there's other approaches.
Yeah.
Forcibly capturing
in my
someone.
experience, I think that a large part of the value for me of the practice of Unitarianism is, I mean, because like it resonated just with my worldview, but there's something very comforting about the ritual of church service, of like getting together, having some sort of musical thing, having some sort of sermon, meeting in community. And I think that it's not talked enough about with like how big a percentage of the value of church participation has to do with being part of a group, like having people that care about what's going on in your life, like people that are, going to potentially be there for you if you're in a difficult time or whatever. I think as humans, especially in the USA, have become so individualized and our lives are so separate from one another that we really need spaces like churches, whether it be a church or something different, but we need spaces like that where we are able to come together, be quiet, have some reflection, and generally also being in a community of people that are interested in growth, interested in self-betterment, interested in reflection on what we're doing that we can improve on, and being able to make sense of the world around us in a way that has something to do with morality and
I wonder if the community center model, right? So it seems like the parish church model is in decline, and we have evidence of this on statistical levels and experiential levels. But I wonder if the community center model might be one of the future, where instead of having a church on every corner, you'd have, community centers, and still, there will always be parish churches, I'm sure. But I wonder if that might just be a more practical model for, Christianity in the decades ahead.
I mean, it has to change at some point, and it's to say that it hasn't changed. It has changed through history. You look at it, right? And what's the next incarnation? What's going to look like in the future? It's interesting, but I think there's enough people who care, and they want to make a change for the better in the best way they know how, right?
I think there's a lot of people out there doing deconstruction too, whether it's, deconstruction of their particular denomination or deconstruction of Christianity altogether, that, people are doing this. I think the internet culture of do your own research, as people might shout at you in various circumstances, really encourages folks to be more aware of what's out there and maybe shop around. I like to think that could have, a beneficial impact, but I also know that, I think in Christianity, when it's fully centralized, it gets into some mucky area. So I'm wondering if a decentralized Christianity might show us something that folks feel a little more interested in interacting with. But a lot of denominations are based around hierarchy and centralization. So that's going to be a hard line for some groups to walk.
It's murky, right? I don't know. That's what I said. It's like I'm not sure what direction is going to take.
Well, one of my professors used to talk about it as like a cell, and that there's what's in the cell and what's outside the cell, and if you don't have something separating what's inside from what's outside, you don't necessarily have a community anymore. You may have something different. And I think something like there's a lot of hierarchical structures out there, and they get a bad reputation because their faults are noticeable, because they're, centralized and structured and visible. But I also think that, my denomination, Congregationalism and the United Church of Christ, we have consistency issues because we are made up of a patchwork of other traditions. And if someone if the General Synod makes a decision, the individual congregation can say, well, we're not doing that. And they're under no obligation to do that. And, they can either hold a vote saying, no, we don't agree with that, or they can just not hold a vote and carry on as they were and simply not care. A lot of people look at that and they're like, is that even a denomination then? That's a valid question. Right. There is something to be said for, not having enough structure to be an actual structure. And I think that's what churches are struggling with, that they used to be center of the community, and now maybe they're adjacent that community. It depends on what that church's relationship is with folks. I don't know how to pronounce your name, but I know you were in here earlier, so I want to give you an opportunity to talk and introduce yourself, maybe ask a question or tell your story. Liolisk.
Yeah, I love these names.
Oh, wait, can you guys hear me all right?
Little far.
Yeah, sounds
a bit
good.
of background.
Yeah.
All right, how about now?
Nope, you've gone deep into a cave. How can we get you out of the cave? How can we help you?
All right, just a second. Let me take out these headphones, see if that helps.
Yeah, Reddit talk is not always the most cooperative when you're trying to find your ideal audio video scenario.
All right, what about?
Speak.
Okay, try again. Yeah.
Speak to us.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah, sounds good.
Much better.
Yeah, so I've been bouncing in and out of this chat room. I've been kind of busy, but last time I was in here, you guys were talking about faith and things regarding faith. I'm not sure where you guys are at in the conversation right now, but earlier I was gonna ask you guys what do you think about psychedelics involved in the birth of a lot of religions and that theory.
I'm going to say something, and then I'll give you guys an opportunity to reply. There are definitely parts of the Bible that have made, earnest readers question whether or not the writer had some sort of psychotropic experience.
Like the entire book of Revelations.
Also Ezekiel 10 that talks about biblically accurate angels, which is the inspiration for my little Reddit icon here. That, like most people,
nice.
I was in a seminary school full of dedicated church ladies who were all spending money to be there so we could all study together. And I swear it was the church ladies who raised their hands saying, yo, this is a little crazy. Was he on something and interacting with something? And our seminary professor did not say that it was an invalid position, though I think this is a common view that people have when they read some of these passages of the Bible and say, what was involved with that?
Oh man, he's gone. Okay, he's in and out.
He's back.
Yeah. I'll probably say this and then after I'll probably have to head out. But yes, I can't speak for all of the religions in the world, but yes, there is a practice of.
I was hoping you would speak for all the religions in the world, but I'll swallow my
pressure.
disappointment.
Speak for them all.
I'm so sorry, but yes, there has been instances where substance have been used. Not sure it would be psychedelics in the term that we use it right now, but yes, there's have been things where they've used it to either.
Also, fasting is a powerful drug. Fasting alone, especially people, again, be careful fasting. You can mess yourself up.
Right. And it could also be said the same thing when another example, when Jesus, we talked about this, right? When Jesus was in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. Yeah.
Look at you remembering previous recordings.
Yeah. And it's relevant, right? Because there is this moment of just extreme conditions and the mind doesn't, work 100%, and you start seeing things or you start going through this meditative state. You're more aware of things that are not physical, right? And it's interesting. I feel like there is some stuff like that is involved. I guess I wouldn't say.
Let's also point out wine is central to many, if not most, Christians' understanding. So I'm not saying that wine is psychotropic, but give it its credit. It's definitely a part of the mix.
Yeah, it happens.
Have you guys heard of the book called The Immortal Key?
I have not.
Sounds interesting, though.
Yeah, it's I forget the author's name, but he came on Joe Rogan's podcast. Him and a guy named Graham Hancock. Are you familiar with him?
I can't say that I am.
Well, they talk about his book that recently came out, I think maybe last year or the year before, called The Immortal Key, and a lot of studies and evidence of how these psychedelic compounds were involved in everything from Christianity to ancient Greece to...
This I've heard before, that each religion might have been born off of some sort of psychotropic experience that connected them with the divine. That definitely sounds like an interesting idea. I feel like that's basically what we've been considering is whether or not it's a practice in the religion. But there are also, I think there are religions that incorporate psych. I don't know to what extent.
Yeah.
I don't know how central it is. I feel like that's the big question, whether or not it was the inspiration for how central or valid is that practice to the faith group today.
There are definitely groups in the United States now that are legally able to use ayahuasca as part of their ceremonies because it is part of their religious practice.
There's been some legislation to that, hasn't there, about other things as well, that like for therapeutical purposes, that it's being
So a few years back, psilocybin was fast tracked as a breakthrough therapy for PTSD and certain types of treatment resistant depression and anxiety, especially in relation to cancer treatment. I am super interested in this area of study, especially as a music therapist, because so much of what drives me as a musician and a music therapist is the experience of transcendence, and is also a big driver of my my participation in religious experience and spiritual experience. And I feel like that space of transcendence is so powerfully healing for people, whether you access that through music or through church or through psychedelics. I think there's something so valuable in that. And just on a personal level, like my experiences with psychedelics have been absolutely transformative in terms of my understanding of
Would you
the
say
world.
Overwhelmingly positive?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the time, like during any particular psychedelic trip, like your mind/spirit is going to bring up things that need to be worked through. So most of, and I've had like a handful of experiences that each time it seems like the overall experience is overwhelmingly positive. Almost always there's a section of it to get through that is uncomfortable, that's bringing up things that are asking for healing in various ways, or whatever it is. But
I don't know how I feel about that. I was on board to start with, but the fact that it's going to be difficult in many ways has kind of thrown me off the trail now, guys. I'm starting to think that these psychotropic drugs are really serious. Maybe
it's not for everybody. I will say that it's not for everybody.
I would go out on a limb and say it's not, but I can definitely respect those for whom it is a part of their experience.
Yeah, and for me, like going back to the sensory piece too, I feel like there were things that I was learning on an intellectual level that I knew to be true, that it wasn't until my psychedelic experiences that I felt those things to be true on a sensory and bodily level. And so I think that it helps to integrate the mind and the body in a lot of ways. And a lot of these, I mean, psilocybin, I think in particular, is really a lot of what it's doing is just opening up your filters in your brain and the categories that you're putting things into just automatically. Like your brain, like our brains are doing this for us right now. Like we're not paying attention to the sensation of our shirts on our back because it's not important experience.
Well, now I am.
But like in a psychedelic experience, there's this equalization of sensory input that is able to open some really interesting doors because you're able to make connections that your brain would like just bypass before.
Hey guys, I have a good story about this actually. I don't know what I just got into. I've never seen that Reddit had this feature that you could talk to people before, but
congratulations, you've stepped into a bizarre world.
It is a bigger world indeed.
Welcome.
So I had a friend whose name was Mac.
Don't dox your friend. First names only.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, but his real name's Matthew, and so I asked him one day, like, if he's ever read the Gospel Matthew, and he's never, he's never read the Bible before. So it was very interesting for me to like introduce it to him, and I was like, well, why don't you just, Matthew is, the beginning gospel. So just, see how it goes. and he starts to read it, and I'm there with him. And
are you just watching him read the Bible? That sounds a little intense.
I'm not exactly.
You breathing down his neck while he's like, oh, okay.
Well, I was like, well, here you go. Here's the book. And I just like exited the room, like go, let me know if you have questions or when you're done or anything like that,
You peeked around the corner. You were definitely peeking around to see what he was up to.
It wasn't long before he was like, I'm done, like he reached his point, with it. But what was interesting, what his main comment was to being kind of like reading scripture was, it was like shrooms. He was like, this is like a shroom trip. And it's just even the beginning of Matthew, nothing like, Revelations or Ezekiel.
What translation did you give him? Like, was he reading the King James version? Because that might be part of it.
No, it was the, it's like that little Protestant book that you give to people that are like, like new Christians. So it doesn't even have the rest of the Bible on it. It just has, the New Testament.
Oh, is it like that little green one?
Yeah, it's a little green one with an arrow that points up.
I had that one.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, but I just had it like floating around my car. And so, but anyways, a comment that I left in the chat, and I kind of wanted to, explain more, is I think, psychotropic drugs, and I've done it before. I've done shrooms before. I felt that ultimately it gave you a context for what real spirituality feels like, just like how you could be, in nature and have an intense experience, like on a hike or anything like that. It's very similar to what the beginnings of real spiritual. Now, my belief is that real spirituality is far more profound and encompassing and not as expedient as drugs are. I mean, some would, say that doing acid or doing shrooms would, fall under the sin of sorcery. But I'm not really going to go that far today, but, or ever. But,
I think that our computers under that definition would count as sorcery as well. So I don't know that we want to start a slippery sorcery slope. Whew.
Yeah.
This Reddit talk is brought to you by the slippery slope.
Well, before we continue, I just want to head out. And this is a really incredible conversation, and thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank you,
Thanks
Void
for being
Boy.
here, Void Boy. I think we're going to be wrapping it up pretty soon anyway.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Thanks again.
Yeah, so anybody that's interested in hearing the initial conversation on Joe Rogan's podcast that I was talking about, I commented the link in this chat. This is my first time using this, so I'm not sure if anybody's able to see it or not.
Yeah, it shows up as a comment thread. I wish it was more like a Twitch feed, if you've seen those. The rumor is they're gonna change it. But yeah, we've been telling folks, drop your links in the comments so people can see what you're talking about.
Yeah, cool. This is a new feature that I found as well too today, so I'll be dropping in more often. It's pretty cool.
Yep, we usually do our Reddit talk /podcast. We do it on Wednesdays at 4 p.m. and 4 p.m. Eastern time, and Sundays at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So feel free to stop in. Our Wednesday is more structured, like a traditional podcast, and our Sunday is a casual conversation. We usually call it Casual Sunday. So we're going to be signing off in a minute with our outro music. Olive, did you want to say anything else? Give a last word as our guest before we sign out?
Sure. I just appreciate everybody being interested in all of this stuff. I think this is such a great community. So I appreciate your existence in general, as well as your willingness to listen to me ramble about my experiences. And I'll also mention that you can follow Olive Tiger on the places on the internet. We have Instagram and Facebook, and we're not super active on Twitter, but it does exist. But yeah, we have a new record coming out too in October. So if you're interested, stay tuned. We are actually, I just launched a Patreon before signing into this, so I'm going to announce that in the next day or two.
Well, drop that Patreon in our comment space, so it is there for people to discover.
Cool. So yeah, there's lots of ways to get involved, and yeah, I'm based in Connecticut, and we're going to do, I think, a little like regional tour in October. So if you're anywhere in the northeast of the USA, you might be able to catch us playing the cello and the violin and all kinds of instrumental stuff. And yep. But yeah, thank you so much.
Well, and thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing so much of your really unique experiences. We appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.
All right, so we are about to sign off here and put on our outro music, but this has been the Dank Christian Memes podcast. Dank Christian Memes is a place for all kinds of Christians and all sorts of non-Christians. We run these Reddit Talk podcasts Wednesdays and Sundays. We don't know what we're doing, but we did this. So if you'd like to join us, check us out, and thank you very much for being here. Here comes our outro music by Olive Tyler.
Thank you. I've been following you guys for years.
Well, thanks for following us for years.